Welcome to the Unwashed Asses, episode 97, recorded on Friday, March 29th, 2019. You'd think I'd have the date right, considering we'd recorded in the morning, but no, I'm a very forgetful fellow, and just figure, hey, let's check in on you over your lunch break, not my lunch break. I'm off today. I eat lunch whenever I want. I'm gonna do my best to record this because I have a very tiny sleepy cat laying in my lap, and doing my best not to disturb her because she's becoming increasingly more lap friendly, and so I'm only trying to encourage this behavior. But at the same time, as you as well as I know, anytime a cat gets in your lap, you're legally, morally, and otherwise not allowed to move until they move first. So as she gets her nap on and looks out the window here, I'm going to do my best to make sure she stays cozy. No, I might as well get these other shows out of the way here when the door-to-door religious zealots knocked on my door, which is a first. I've never had them come by yet. But thankfully, as I was still clad in my breakfast pants and just a crumpled up t-shirt. Like, sorry to disturb you, but you're invited to this event, blah, 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 blah. And then they just kind of left. So thankfully they didn't want to come in and talk, which is good because I was in the middle of losing a Gambit match. But no Destiny talk. No, instead what we want to talk about is continuing our series of the 100 greatest movies. This week actually is a carryover from last week because I talked about it previously. Our viewing got interrupted, but it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This was I don't know if it was one of Nicholson's first movies. It's definitely the oldest one that I know him from, but it is lauded as one of the greatest of all time. It's one that I feel like a lot of people kind of have to watch, not just because of how good it is, but because if your high school courses were anything like mine, then your basic psychology class is going to make you view this along with several other movies, just because of how good the portrayals are of the mental illnesses in play. And your sociology class might even throw this one in too because of the group dynamic and how folks interact with one another. But it was made in 1975 and ended up getting... it was the second film to win all 5 major Academy Awards for Best Picture, Actor in a Lead Role, Actress in a Lead Role, Director, and then the Screenplay. The first one was, where was that here? It happened one night in 1934 and didn't happen again until 1993 with Silence of the Lambs. No, I'm not seeing anything past that, but again, I could be incorrect because it was only a cursory glance. Oh, I'm sorry, am I disturbing you? Oh, big yawns. Okay, we're settled back down now. So the basic plot is that we have Jack Nicholson's Carrie. I can't fucking talk. Jack Nicholson's character, Randall McMurphy. But I see it here spelled out as McMurphy, but I don't know if it's the accent because it's based up in the Pacific Northwest. They kept calling him McMurphy. He is moved over to a mental institution. He's apparently serving a short sentence on a prison farm for statutory rape of a 15-year-old girl. And I don't... uh-oh. I'm trying not to sneeze, still dealing with the cold here. Okay, I think it's passed. I was going to lose a cat and have to do some more editing. This was something that I thought they had kind of glossed over. I know when he was doing his initial check-in with the head of the hospital, they were listing his crimes, but I don't ever remember anything about statutory rape. It just seemed like he was a repeat offender for general disorderly conduct. But the idea itself is that he's not actually mentally ill. He's just trying to essentially get an easier sentence, essentially hang out and relax instead of, being put to work on the work farm and at the end of a sentence clock out. But we soon find out that due to his personality and that of the head nurse, Nurse Ratched, clashing, he might be here longer than he initially planned. And that's something that they touch on when he's talking to one of the orderlies, like, oh yeah, I've only got 60 days left. And the orderly replies, no, you're here until we say you're good to go. This isn't a terminal. I shouldn't say terminal. This isn't a definite thing. You're only here for so many days. And this is the part where we find that the other characters that or the other patients there are almost all voluntary except for him and Chief. And so there is a lot of really good dynamic and interaction between the cast, and I hadn't seen this since I was in high school, and I was surprised to see how well fleshed out the characters were and how well the performances held up. Despite, being released in 1975, aside from the hairstyles and the way the shots are set up, it doesn't feel super dated at all. I would have placed it in the late 60s. I think it was meant to be based in 1963. Okay, so I wasn't too far off. But because they are in a hospital setting, of course, they're all wearing, like scrubs or comfy robes, and the hospital staff, they're all wearing stuff that's kind of on par with what's going on today. So in that sense, the movie holds up well, and you're not feeling like you're being pulled out of place or that it feels like a period piece. It holds up extremely well. But the performances are really what carries it, because again, the camera work is, while competent, there's nothing spectacular going on here. The score is good and sets the tone right, but despite receiving critical praise, it's not something that I really recall. Sure, there are a couple like low sounding violin or cello notes played at the beginning, and then you have the iconic score at the end when Chief is escaped and he's running towards freedom. Nothing about the movie aside from the cast is what really sticks out, and how well the acting is, because even the story itself is a bit predictable in the sense that you kind of get a feeling for how things are going to play out, typically because of how McMurphy comes in, and this is something I can relate to. He seeks to be the center of attention, seeks to have control over the situation, but he's met with the authority figure that is Nurse Ratched, who, when I was younger and even a bit now, I saw her as more just overly strict, without really recognizing the true way, or maybe the better way, to treat patients. And I see now that she is a character that's truly devoted to caring for her patients, but she believes that her way and the hospital way is the best way of doing it. It isn't really open to interpretation or help from outside sources or really changing up the schedule, which is something we see in the many times her and McMurphy come to blows, where he wants to watch the World Series because, quote, he's never missed a World Series. And she says, well, put it up to a vote. And while initially the vote fails, the second time the vote comes around, he's able to get everybody in the group therapy session to raise their hands, at which point, like a kid losing a game, she changes the rules to, well, you have to ask everybody on the ward. You'll only have 50% of the vote, and that's not enough. So at that point, yeah, McMurphy tries to go around to get other people to watch the game, and most of them are mute. So they can't vote, or they don't understand, so they won't vote. And at which point she shuts it down, when Chief is the only one who seems to raise his hand, but he's largely believed to be both dumb and deaf. So she discards his vote, and rather than let her get the upper hand, McMurphy instead relegates himself to acting out as if he were watching the game, which rouses the other patients who are naturally drawn to him because he does something that Nurse Ratched can't, in that he instills a sense of self-confidence. He makes them feel better and more worthwhile than what they are, and truly helps them progress their treatment. Because while they're all there voluntarily, I don't necessarily believe that they're being treated effectively. And, at this time, in 1963, mental health and mental health care is something that's in its infancy. Sure, we're a long way from the early 1900s, late 1800s, but we still have so much further to go when compared to modern circumstances. So while she is being progressive by introducing things like group therapy and trying to work through it, the patients are handled with a very heavy hand. They are not constantly but routinely beaten by the orderlies when they kind of get out of hand. They're constantly medicated, and for things that they truly don't understand, which is one of the other points of contention that McMurphy runs into, is, it's pill time. Well, what's in these pills? You don't need to know that. And again, I can relate that, well, I don't want to put something in me that I don't know what it is, or I don't understand why you're doing this. And their refusal to tell him, it just further stokes the fire. It's kind of like the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. And that is kind of how the movie itself plays out, as just these two forces between Nurse Ratched and McMurphy constantly coming to blows, and until one essentially is going to give up or fail. And while McMurphy is an asshole in how he handles things, because if he doesn't get his way, he is a bit like a petulant child in that way, him and Ratched are like mirrors. He does truly, well, again, like a mirror, he truly cares for the other patients. We see it in several instances where, he steals a bus and takes them fishing, and he introduces candy to them. And that's something that really comes into play throughout the movie, is that he treats them like real people rather than like patients, where Ratched will talk down to them and chide them. And in the case of Billy, which eventually leads to his suicide, she doesn't recognize that she herself is the problem in helping them progress further. And that if she were more open to outside or out-of-the-box ways of therapy, it could help. Because the fishing trip alone, while it is a monumental scene, it really establishes that tone for how they really begin to heal and why they look up to McMurphy the way that they do. And so stuff like that is super effective. And it's those lasting impressions and interactions that really, it sticks with you, it resonates with you. I remembered more about that than I did about really anything else in the film. Of course, there are key sequences, like when McMurphy's character gets the electroshock therapy, and then eventually leads up to getting the lobotomy for trying to avenge Billy and murdering Nurse Ratched, which then leads to Chief smothering him with a pillow because his friend's essentially gone. And then this is the final thing that pushes Chief to escape and reclaim freedom. It was all so wonderfully told, and it pulls at those heartstrings at the right moments, and does what it needs to do. Surprisingly enough, when I did some digging, by digging, I mean I just looked it up on Wikipedia and read a couple other articles. Kirk Douglas had originated the role of McMurphy for the 63 and 64 Broadway stage version. It's all based on the Ken Kesey novel of the same name. So he had purchased the rights to the film, and it took him a decade to try and get it onto being made. Eventually, he ended up giving it over to his son, Michael Douglas, who got it produced. And while Kirk wanted to play the role of McMurphy, he was too old, so they ultimately kicked it over to Nicholson, who was 38. This was directed by Milos Forman, who previously was known for the 1967 Czechoslovakian film The Fireman's Ball, which I haven't seen. I don't recognize the name for anything else, but he had come in and and done a rewrite of the script and kind of outlined what he wanted to do and took it personally. And this is kind of what was heralded as getting things moving forward here. But I trailed off. I got distracted earlier. I was surprised at how many people were in this movie. By how many people, I mean Danny DeVito and the hell is his name? Christopher Lloyd. I guess this was Christopher Lloyd's first movie. And when you look at him, like if you're like me, you know him mostly from Back to the Future, and it looks like a super young Doc Brown, and I guess it's because it is, but it's shocking to see him at this time. And Danny DeVito is just completely unrecognizable from who he what he looks like, even from things Matilda was 20-ish years later, but again, totally different in appearance. The film was shot entirely in the where was it here? Salem mental facility, where the book, I guess, was actually based. I'm sorry, Oregon State Hospital. My bad. But it was in Salem, where the cast actually was assigned by the hospital director, who also played the director in the film, to shadow patients that mimicked symptoms to what they were dealing with. They also had the actors sleep overnight in the wards, and then to help the patients themselves, they also had them serve as crew within the film to help things come along. So I thought that was a neat take, and realizing that the director in the film was also the director of the hospital was interesting, because I guess they're like, oh yeah, well here's your script, but just kind of do what you do naturally. And I mean, had I not found out that fact beforehand, I would have had no idea. Like, oh, well, what else has this fellow been in? Because yeah, he's very competent and quite believable, because I guess that's just his job. As it stacks up against the others on our list, I think it's pretty damn good. It's definitely up there when I consider the other movies, and I don't really want to get into a ranking until we're much further into this, but it was a nice breath of fresh air, and I went into it hesitant because I thought I was going to be more bummed out by it, because we all know how the movie ends and how the story ends, but it's the journey that gets you there that really makes it worthwhile. Couldn't find it to stream anywhere for quote-unquote free, like Netflix or Hulu, so we ended up just renting it on Vudu like we do so many other things. But no, it was really, really good. So even if you don't want to expand your film horizons and broaden your experience with movies, it's definitely worth a watch, just because of it is a good movie. It is a really, really good movie. And I shouldn't have said really, really, because it's just lazy. It is an extraordinary film. There we go. So that's going to wrap it up. If you have your own thoughts or questions, criticisms, critiques, complaints, or otherwise just want to talk about our movies, drop an email over at theunwashedasses@gmail.com. Again, theunwashedasses@gmail.com. And of course, this year, all we're asking to help the show grow is tell a friend, let them know they can get TUA wherever they get their podcasts normally. And I'll leave you to it. Enjoy your lunch. Enjoy your 3 o'clock coffee. And we'll talk to you later.